One summer evening, my little brother and I were home alone. We were play fighting as brothers do, and chasing each other around the house. I ended up chasing him into our parents' room. There were no windows in our parents' room, so when the lights were off, it was pitch black. I thought it would be funny to play a trick on my brother, so I decided to scare him and turn out the lights. I was standing by the doorway, so when he wasn't looking, I hit the light switch and left the room, closing the door behind me. He was left alone in the darkness. I put my ear to the door to listen to him panic. I heard him say, "What are you doing?" I realized he thought I was still in the room. "What are you doing?" He said. "You're freaking me out. Please stop." I wondered what he was talking about. "I'm not joking," he cried. "Get away from me." "Ha ha. I'm not even in there." I laughed. All of a sudden, I heard my brother scream. It was a loud, blood-curdling scream. It freaked me out and I decided to open the door and let him out, but when I turned the handle, it wouldn't budge. It was locked. My little brother was still screaming and begging for help. I started to panic. I had no idea what to do. I kept jiggling the handle and pushing on the door as hard as I could, but it wouldn't open. My brother was in trouble. He needed me and I couldn't help him. All of a sudden, he stopped screaming. I tried the door handle again, and to my surprise, it opened easily. It wasn't locked at all. Relieved, I opened the door and turned on the light. My brother was cowering in the corner, sobbing uncontrollably. I calmed him down and brought him out of the room. Downstairs, I finally got him to explain what had happened. He told me that when the lights went out, he was scared. Then, his eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness. There was a little bit of light leaking in from the crack under the door. He said he saw a figure standing in the corner with its back to him. He thought it was me. When he asked, "What are you doing?" he said I turned and started walking slowly across the room towards him. He couldn't make out my face. He couldn't make out any features at all. It was just a dark figure walking towards him. He said the figure came closer and closer until it was standing over him, staring down at him. Then, he saw a hand coming towards him and grabbing him by the shoulder. The touch of the hand was freezing cold and its grip was very strong. It hurt him and he screamed in pain. When I opened the door and turned on the light, the figure was gone. To this day, my brother refuses to talk about this. Whenever anyone brings it up, he simply leaves the room. He has admitted that he is bothered by what happened that day, and he still has nightmares about it from time to time. He still doesn't have any explanation for what happened. This happened 15 years ago. I was working nights at the time and started work at 9 p.m. One night, I arrived at work and my supervisor gave me a confused look. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "I'm working tonight," I replied. "But, you called in sick a few hours ago." I was a bit confused. It must have been someone else. I laughed. I looked at the message that said I had called in. The call came at 6:50 p.m. and the message said that I had gotten sick while I was out cleaning up after a storm the night before. There had been a storm, but I had not gone out to clean up. The whole thing struck me as very weird. I decided to call my wife and tell her about it. I picked up the phone and dialed my home phone number. It rang twice before it was picked up and a raspy male voice said, "Hello?" I was so shocked, I didn't know what to do. I looked at the phone to make sure I had dialed the right number. The person on the other end said, "Hello?" Again in the same raspy voice. "Hello? Who is this?" I said nervously. "This is Taylor," the voice replied. "Who is this?" A chill ran down my spine. "My name is Taylor." "Where's Ann?" I said, my voice shaking. I wanted to scream. "Ann's in bed," the voice replied. "Who is this?" I dropped the phone and told my supervisor there was an emergency and I needed to get home immediately. As I was leaving, my confused supervisor picked up the phone and said, "Hello." I drove home as fast as I could. My mind was racing. I couldn't understand what was going on. When I got to my house, I burst through the front door and found my wife sitting in the living room, calmly watching TV. She was shocked to see me home so early. She said there was no one else in the house and the phone hadn't rung all night. I picked up the phone to call my supervisor, but the line was dead. The next evening, when I went back to work, my supervisor gave me a weird look and asked, "How the hell did you do that?" He told me that when I left the night before, he had picked up the phone, and when he realized that the person on the other end of the line sounded exactly like me, he freaked out and hung up. It got even more weird. He said that, a minute later, I had called back from home and asked him what was going on. According to him, I was angry and said I was sick and did not feel like playing games and told him to stop prank calling me and hung up. I just stared at my supervisor and told him I had no idea what was going on. Later, I found out that the phone line for my area had been knocked down by the storm the night before. This is by far the craziest thing that ever happened to me. When I was 12 years old, we lived in a really old house. It was at least 100 years old and there were rumors that it was haunted. One night, as I was lying in bed, my mother came into my room. Or at least, I thought it was my mother. The room was dark and the only light was coming from the hall. Instead of saying good night, she started to tell me a weird and disturbing story about how a demon once came to a 12-year-old girl. She said the demon came at night, crawled up next to the girl and began growling in her left ear. She told me the girl said the Lord's Prayer over and over and the demon eventually went away. I remember just lying there, looking at her and wondering why she was telling me this story, especially right before I went to sleep. She was really freaking me out. Eventually, she finished the story and just got up and left without saying anything more. I lay there in the darkness, trying to figure out why my mom would say those things. I tried to put it out of my mind and concentrated on getting comfortable and falling asleep. All of a sudden, I heard the most awful noise I have ever heard in my life. It was in my left ear. I couldn't tell if sound was human or animal. It was a growling, screeching, moaning sound that left me terrified. I was too scared to move. I was too scared to breathe. I was paralyzed by fear. I wanted to scream, but I was afraid of what might happen if I did. At that moment, I thought of the Lord's Prayer and started reciting it in my head. I was too terrified to say anything aloud. The growling continued for what felt like an eternity. Then, suddenly, it stopped. I lay there listening for any other sounds, but all I could hear was an eerie silence. I lay awake all night until the sun came up. The next morning, I asked my mother about the story she had told me. She claimed she knew nothing about it. She said she had never come into my room the previous night. What she said scared me even more than the growling itself. "That wasn't me," she protested. "Why would I tell you such a horrible story? Why would I scare you like that at bedtime?" To this day, I still cannot come up with an explanation. I believe that whoever or whatever it was that came into my room that night, it was not my mother. I think it was her doppelganger or a protective spirit disguised as her, trying to warn me of what was about to happen, trying to tell me how to save myself from the demon that was about to come for me.